I'm going to present how to service a wheel bearing. So if you guys like to get your sheets out, your project sheets out, and one of the first steps is to raise the vehicle and support it, and make sure your instructor has okayed that step. We already have the vehicle raised and supported, so we're going to go ahead and get started into checking the wheel bearing play. So to check wheel bearing play, what you need to do is you need to grasp the top half of the wheel and the bottom half of the wheel. And what I like to do is I like to put my fingers in the first groove of the tire, and what you do is you pull on the top while pushing on the bottom, and vice versa. And you feel if there's any play, any clicking. Okay? So you go ahead and do that, and this wheel has no play whatsoever. Now remember, I'm not manhandling the tire off there, so I don't use excessive pressure. I'm just feeling if there's any play, and there isn't. Normally we'd be servicing wheel bearings when we do a brake job, or when there's play in the bearing. We would remove it, disassemble it, lubricate it, examine, reassemble. So in this case here, it's fine, but we're going to go through the steps anyways. Okay, students, now we've removed the wheel, and on some vehicles, when there's a wheel bearing, a serviceable wheel bearing, you can remove the braking component. In this case, we have drum brakes, and I can pull the drum brake right off and still have the hub there. Okay, so we're going to service the hub on itself. Some vehicles, the drum or the brake rotor, in this case is drum, is permanently mounted to the hub, so you have to work around it. In this case, we're lucky we can remove it. Okay, so I go ahead and did that. Now, to remove the dust cap, we have to get the dust cap pliers here. Okay, and you simply put them in there around the dust cap. You make sure it's in the grooves. Okay, and you give it a good squeeze, and then you wiggle left and right and pull at the same time. Okay, and that'll get that off. Okay. Now we have a cotter pin and a castle nut. So I'm going to remove the cotter pin with my side cutting pliers. I'm going to bend it straight. And then I'm going to remove. Now cotter pins are not reusable, so we're going to throw this one out and we're going to get a new one when we reassemble. Now I remove the little retaining clip out of the way. Next I have my large spindle nut, and this spindle nut is not super tight, so we can use a pair of channel lock or tongue and groove pliers to remove. This is the only type of bolt you would use a set of pliers for. You would never use a set of pliers for any other bolt on the vehicle. And the way pliers work, guys, while I have you here watching, is I have to loosen the nut. So lefty, loosey, righty, tighty. So I'm going to loosen the nut. And if I were to hold the pliers in this way, as I were to push the plier, it would naturally want to open. Pliers are designed to open and are designed to work this way. Okay? So as I loosen, the plier grips a little bit better. Okay? So here we go. So once I got it loose, I can remove it with my fingers there. So I got the nut off. Then I use get my washer out, or I pull out the hub slightly and then push it back in. That'll pull my washer off. And then I can pull my outer wheel bearing. Okay? So I'm going to be servicing this in a minute. So I'm going to put this off to the side for now. Now, here I have my hub. In order to remove my hub, I just simply pull it off. And I have my inner wheel bearing with my inner grease seal still there. So I have to remove that. And I'm going to go to the bench in a second to do that. Okay, let me get some paper towels there. Okay, so now I'm going to remove my inner wheel bearing. So I have my outer one here. And we noticed when we pulled the bearing out, the tapered side was facing in. And what is the tapered side? That's the side that's smaller, okay? So this side is tapered compared to this side, all right? And that always goes on towards the inside of the hub, okay? So I remove that, and I put it off to the side. And I'm very gentle with my wheel bearings because I cannot drop them. If I drop them, I have to replace my wheel bearing. So to remove the inner wheel bearing, which is still there, and the grease seal, there's two ways of doing it. The first way we can use is the grease seal remover. By using the grease seal remover, I'm going to be damaging the grease seal. Cut. Forgot the grease seal. So if I were to use my grease seal remover, I simply slide it in here, hook it in underneath, and pry it back. But the thing is it damages the seal. Now, the seal is reusable provided it's in good shape. And this seal is still in good shape. The rubber is not torn. So I'm going to try and save it through another method. So I'm going to take my hub, I'm going to open my vise up. Put my hub down there, and I'm not going to tighten it up, I'm going to leave it loose. Okay? I'm going to grab a brass punch. Okay, it's brass, soft metal. Brass is a soft metal, and the bearing is made of steel, which is a harder, denser metal. By using brass and punching it out, if there's any damage, it's done to the brass punch and not to the bearing. So I'm going to put it on an angle, I'm going to put it on the top of the bearing, rest on the top of the bearing. I'm going to grab my ball peen hammer, and let's not forget our safety glasses every time we use a hammer. Okay, and I'm going to give it some love taps. Then I'm going to move to the other side, 180 degrees away. And then over to that side there, and so on and so forth, until it comes out. Okay, so the bearing is almost out here. I'm just going to give it one last little tap. Okay, here we go. There we go. And make sure. Alright, so now the grease seal is out. You can see that. I'm going to put it off to the side. And I'm going to pull the bearing out. And you're going to notice the tapered side is in. Again, tapered side in. So whenever we put serviceable wheel bearings, these are called tapered wheel bearings. Whenever we pull them out, we notice that the tapered side is in. We don't put them in backwards, okay guys? Make sure it goes in that way. So now you can see it's all full of dirty grease. So what we have to do now is clean that out, okay? So we grab a bunch of paper towel, okay? And you be diligent. It has to be really, really clean, okay guys? You can't mess around, can't have any leftover grease or any leftover dirt. Can't be anything in there, okay? It's got to be really, really clean. So don't be afraid to use up the paper towel here. And remember, we're using paper towel, not rags. Okay, because the paper towel is nice and clean to begin with, and the rag has been sitting around for a while. Okay. Once my instructor has okayed that the wheel bearing hub is nice and clean, then I can move to the next step. Okay, you can see I'm going through a lot of paper towel here. Okay, so that's nice and clean, ready to go to the next step. Now, what I also want to do is I want to clean the grease seal itself, and I want to remove any sort of leftover dirt from the old bearing, maybe from the braking system, or even road dirt. I'm going to clean that up nice, make sure it's all clean. Okay. Get another paper towel here. This is probably the dirtiest project that we have out of all our projects. And that's because we're dealing with grease. Okay, so that's nice and clean. I'm going to put that to the side. Now, to clean the bearings, it's a little more involved. I can't just simply wipe off the grease. What I need to do is I need to take these bearings over to the parts washer. And in the parts washer, we have a very strong chemical called Safety Clean. Now, the trade name for Safety Clean is called Varsol. We don't actually use Varsol anymore. Varsol is a bad chemical. It has been known to cause psoriasis. Although Safety Clean is better for us, it still can cause long-term effects, so we're going to use a lot of safety equipment. So I'm going to grab a pair of nitrile-coated gloves, and I'm going to grab a face mask so I don't breathe in that chemical. Also, very important, make sure you're wearing your safety glasses and your shop coat, because you don't want to get any of that stuff on you when it splashes around. Okay, students, you can see here I'm putting on my safety equipment, putting on my rubber gloves here. I got my face mask on, I don't want to breathe in the chemical. I got my safety glasses, and I got my shop coat. So I'm all set up, ready to get started. So I'm going to take the bearings here, and I'm going to put them in the parts washer. Okay, I'm going to turn on the parts washer, and we got the nasty, dirty chemical coming out. Now here we have a scrub brush. So what I want to do, guys, is basically I want to get the grease from in between the rollers. I want to try to push it out. Okay, so I'm going to wash them to the best of my ability, try to get all the grease out and all the dirt. Okay, you can see how nasty, dirty this chemical is. It's not good for us. So you want to make sure you don't have any open cuts. You don't want to get this stuff in there. You don't want to breathe it in. You don't want to splash it on your clothing because it can ruin your clothing as well. Okay, unfortunately, guys, this is an unnecessary evil, this chemical, in order to break down the grease, because nothing really else breaks down grease like this stuff does. Okay, so we take that. I clean the other one there. Okay. Also, very important, we have to be gentle with the bearings. Okay, bearings are very fragile. It's a hardened steel. Now, like concrete, concrete is really strong up to a point, and after that point it's going to snap and break. Same thing with a hardened steel. Hardened steel is very tough, very durable, but if we were to drop it enough times, the bearing itself will crack, not bend like a piece of steel would on our bicycle frame or something else. Okay? So once I got the bearings all nice and clean, grease-free, I'm going to clean them off with the air blower, try to remove as much of the solvent that I can, and then I'm going to examine it. Okay? Alright students, now it's time to blow the wheel bearings dry with the compressed air. So with compressed air, I'm going to make sure my blue valve is vertical, and that'll allow air to transfer from the tube into the hose, but at the same time I've got to make sure my red valve is horizontal, it's got to be closed, otherwise all the air will come out. So I did that, and now I've got to plug in my tool here, simply just clip in place, there's no spinning or tightening of any manner, okay? It's a coupler, okay guys? So I take my bearing, make sure I have my gloves on again, and I'm going to make sure I have my safety glasses on. Now this is an extremely important step here. Now what I need to do is I need to blow the dirt out from the inside of the bearings. Okay, so I'm going to blow it this way here. I don't want to put it on my finger and blow it this way because the bearing is going to start to spin. And what happens if you start to spin the bearing, I've actually seen students where they spin the bearing and the actual rollers themselves explode outwards and hit them. And it can be very damaging to you, right? So we're going to do that the right way. I'm going to blow it out this way. So once that side's dry, I'm going to rotate it and do the other side. And you can see all the stuff coming out. Final little clean off there. Okay, that bearing is bone dry and clean. Now I'm going to move to the other one. This is the inner one, or the outer one, the smaller one. Okay, now what I'm going to do is very important as well, is I'm going to examine the wheel bearings. Now I'm going to examine the rollers for any sort of nicks, scratches, or chips, any heat marks, because if there are any, now is the time where we have to replace the bearing. We don't reuse bearings if they're damaged, okay? Remember, this is a wheel bearing, and if this wheel bearing fails, then the wheel fails. And if we're driving on the road and that wheel fails, then we can get into a serious accident, okay? So looking at these bearings, looking at these rollers, I can see that they're in relatively good shape, and I'm going to let my instructor know I've examined them, and I'm going to point out any sort of flaws if I do find any, and it looks like we're in good shape here on both bearings. Okay. Next step is we have to pack the bearings full of grease, and this is the dirtiest step. Okay students, now you got to get the wheel bearing and chassis lubricant from the tool room, and this wheel bearing grease is what we're going to use to lubricate the wheel bearings. But before we go ahead and open this and get started, let's roll up our sleeves because this stuff is pretty dirty, okay, and I don't want to get any of that stuff on my shop coat because Mr. Gomes is going to be upset. So here we go, roll up our sleeves. Now I'm not pushing my sleeves up, I'm rolling them up, okay? Because this way they'll stay up. Alright? There's a big difference there. Alright, so roll them up there, guys. Get them out of the way. And that way I don't have to worry about getting grease on it later. Or the next set of students, they don't have to get dirty. Okay. So I'm going to take my grease, nasty dirty stuff. I'm going to take my yellow flexible scraper. Okay. I'm going to take a heaving amount. I'm going to put it on my hand there. I know you're probably thinking this is disgusting. Yes, it is. All right, I'm going to take my wheel bearing, tapered side up. Tapered side up. Okay, guys? I'm going to take my wheel bearing, and I'm going to have this stuff on my hands. And what I'm going to do, guys, is you see the yellowish, whitish plastic ridge around the wheel bearing? I'm going to try to scoop wheel bearing grease in between the rollers with the yellow stuff. I don't want to get any stuff on the steel part, just the yellow guys. So like this. Okay? And I'll do this until the grease starts to come up the top. Now I'm not spreading it around the sides. I want to inject the grease in between the rollers. I'm not smoothing it around the sides. That's doing nothing. That's not getting grease inside. We have to inject the grease in between the rollers. Now if we don't do that, if we fail to get the grease in between the rollers, as soon as we drive down the road, the bearing will seize. Now what that means seize is it'll stop moving. Okay, and if the bearing is seized, then the wheel is seized and we can get into an accident. Okay, so this is an important step here. And I'll keep on going. It doesn't take too long to get it on one side, but we have to go all the way around. And I'll show you that in a second here, as soon as I get this one done. Okay, so I'm reusing a lot of the grease that I've been moving around my hand there, guys. Okay, So I'm not going into the middle, I'm grabbing just a little bit of grease off the edge. Okay, and you can see right here, if we zoom in, we can see right here real close how the grease is starting to come up in between the rollers. Now that section is done, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the bearing and I'm going to start on the next section. Okay, so show your instructor that the grease has started to protrude through the top half of the bearing. Okay, once that's done, I move to the next section and so on and so forth until I get the grease all the way around. Okay, so this can take some time. Make sure you have at least half an hour of period time left before you get this step started, because once you get started you don't want to stop, because it is a little bit of a dirty step, and it's a good idea to have two people doing this, one person on the other bearing, one person on this bearing. Okay guys, so to maximize your efficiency during class time. Alright, it's a group effort. And also very important, make sure we have the tapered side up. Okay, so we're injecting the grease from the bottom side up. Okay. Okay students, now you can see here I got the grease all the way through the top half of the bottom half of the bearing, and it's all the way through, so now we're good. We're ready to reinstall. But before we do that, we have to put some, and I'll have your instructor inspect that. So your instructor has to okay that and say, yeah, that's good. If not, then you have to get started over again. That's not too good. So now what we got to do is we got to put some grease in there. We can't put that in there bone dry. So what I do is I take my scraper again, get a sufficient amount of grease, okay? And don't be cheap on this, okay guys, because we don't want the wheel bearing to fail. Okay, so now you can see there that the hole is plugged. Okay, so that's basically what I want. Not all the way down, but enough that the hole is plugged. Okay. So now we got to take this is my inside, right? So this is the inner. I'm going to take my inner wheel bearing and I'm going to put the tapered side down. Okay, put that in there. Okay, wipe off any sort of grease. I'm going to take my wheel bearing grease seal. I'm going to reinstall that. Now to reinstall that we got to use a hammer. But if I were to go ahead and hit that grease seal with this hammer, I would make a dent right in that location because the metal is pretty thin. Now what I don't want to do is make a dent there. Okay, so what I do is I grab a piece of wood, put it over the wheel bearing grease like that, and I hit the piece of wood. And by using the piece of wood, it's going to hammer. It's almost like hammering the wheel bearing grease seal all the way around at the same time, which clearly this hammer is not able to do. So I put that over there, give it a couple of good whacks. Okay, now you can see there that it has completely seated all the way around. Make sure you have your instructor inspect this. Okay, make sure it's all in, it's in right. And once your inspector has inspected that, you can move over to the next step. Okay guys, I'm wiping off any sort of grease there. So now what we got to do is we got to take this hub and we got to reinstall it in the car. Okay students, so I'm going to take my hub and I'm going to reinstall the spindle. Now you notice how my spindle is nice and clean, so I've gone and already cleaned that spindle. I've removed any sort of old grease that was on there from the previous job. Okay guys, and that's got to be cleaned and examined. Okay, so we got to examine that for heat spots, and we got to examine it for cracks and wears and tears and so on and so forth, and it's got to be pristine just like anything else. Okay, so we take that and we throw that on there, spin it on at the same time. Okay, press it all the way in. Now you can see all this excess grease. We don't need any of that, but that's still good grease. Okay, it's all brand new stuff. So I'm going to take that, I'm going to wipe it off my finger. Okay, try to get it all off there, and I'm going to put that back in my wheel bearing grease tub so that we can reuse it for the next project. Okay, so just like that, put it on the inside there. We can use that for something else later. Alright, so now I'm going to take my outer wheel bearing, okay, and I'm going to put that tapered side in. Okay, so just like so, and I'm going to push it in all the way. It's going to wiggle, wiggle, jiggle, jiggle, jiggle itself in there to make sure it's nice and pressed in there, press fit right in there. Okay, guys? So I'm going to take my paper towel, I'm going to wipe off any sort of excess grease. Okay, and it's going to be dirty, but it's got to be done. Now I'm going to take my washer, and you notice how the little washer has a little something on there, a little tang on there, okay? And I got to line that up with the groove in the spindle, okay? So I'm going to take that and throw that on there, slide it in like so. Then I'm going to take my spindle nut, okay? And I'm going to thread that in by hand. Okay, we always thread in nuts and bolts by hand first, before we use a tool. And we go as tight as we can by hand. Okay, you notice how I got quite a few turns out of there. That tells me that the threads in the nut and the threads in the spindle are in good shape. If I only get half a thread or a quarter of a turn, then that tells me there's something wrong. And if there's something wrong, you should call your instructor over to examine it. Okay, so that's in there nice and snug, but I need to tighten it. So I'm going to grab my pliers again, and since this time I'm going this way, I'm going to use my pliers the opposite direction. I'm going to take my pliers here, okay, press down, and I'm going to spin it until it's snug. Okay, I'm not going to manhandle this. I'm not going to reef it down. You know, like, you don't need to be a 400-pound bodybuilder here to do this step, okay, guys? So I'm just going to squeeze the pliers and tighten it down pretty tight. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to rotate the spindle, and by doing that, I'm moving the grease around the rollers, and that's helping settle the bearings in their place. So I'm going to rotate it a few times. Then I'm going to back it off slightly. Okay, a good quarter turn, eighth of a turn. I'm going to rotate it some more. Then I'm going to tighten it down a little bit more. A little tighter than it was last time. Okay, rotate it some more. You can see some of the grease is coming out, so the bearings are settling in their place. Okay, and I'm going to go back and forth 3, 4, maybe 5 times. I'm going to do this. Okay, so you can see here I'm rotating and tightening and loosening, and at the end, once I'm finished, what I'm going to do is I'm going to give it another little burp, another little oof of tightness there. Okay, just like that. Now this is where I call my instructor over to make sure that the spindle is tight enough. Okay, once my instructor has okayed that step, then I can reassemble the dust cap and all that. So here we go. So I take my little adapter there, my little castle nut adapter washer, and I'm going to put that in there, just like so. And that's designed to help reduce the chance of that spindle nut loosening while we drive. And how it does that is with a cotter pin. Okay, so the cotter pin fits in between the grooves of that adapter. Okay, and there's a hole inside the spindle. I'm going to throw that cotter pin through the spindle, and I always put the cotter pin. You notice the cotter pin has a long side and a short side. I want the long side facing out and the short side facing in. So I'm going to slide that in there, just like so, all the way down. Oh, didn't find the spot, so I'm going to rotate this guy. There we go. There we go, slide in nice and easy. You notice I didn't use any tools to slide that in, okay guys? I don't have to be aggressive, I don't need to hammer it in. Now, I'm going to grab my side cutting pliers. I'm going to grab my long side of my cotter pin, so just the outer half, leave the inner half where it is. I'm going to take it, I'm going to bend it over the spindle. Okay, so you can see half is up, half is down. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut off the excess. But very important, before I go ahead and just cut it off, I'm going to grab the tip with my finger. If I don't do this and cut this off, this little bit is going to fly through the shop and might hit somebody in the eye. So I'm going to take that, hold on to it. There's the excess. I'm going to put it in the garbage. I'm not going to leave it on the floor of the shop because that can leave somebody with a flat tire in the morning. Okay. The excess of the other half of the wheel of the cotter pin, I'm going to cut that off. Again, hold it and cut. There we go, garbage. Okay, again, have your instructor examine this step. Now, the reason behind this cotter pin, guys, is now, since the cotter pin is right down through the spindle, we've got the little castle nut adapter on there. It's on the spindle nut. The spindle nut has no chance of loosening on its own unless that cotter pin has been removed. And since the cotter pin has been bent in place, it will no longer move. Okay, so now I'm going to take my dust cap, stick it on as best I can by hand. Okay, so I've stuck it on as best I can with hand. You can see it doesn't go in all the way. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my little chisel. I'm going to grab on the lip of the dust cap. I'm going to give it a little bit of a tap there, and that's going to help it get into place. Okay, guys. On one side in, go to the other side, go around until it's all the way in. Now I'm not being aggressive here, guys. Okay, it's a dust cap. It doesn't hold the wheel in place. It just keeps the dirt out. Okay, so that's in nice. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to reassemble. I'm going to put my drum back on. I'm going to slide my brake drum right back on there. Okay, guys? Right? And now I'm going to put my wheel on. Once I have my wheel torqued, then we're going to double check for wheel bearing play. Okay, students, so now the wheel has been torqued, installed. The instructor has inspected that it's been torqued. So the last step is just to double check to see if we have any wheel bearing play. So again, same procedure as before. You take your fingers and you put them into the grooves of the tires on top and directly underneath, and you're going to do this push-pull type of thing and see and feel if there's any wheel bearing play. And of course, if we did the job right, there is no wheel bearing play. So again, have your instructor inspect, and if everything's okay, you should get a 10 out of 10. Good.